Hey, Mixer Graham here from therecordingrevolution.com. And this is a series that's going to show you all the basics of how to mix a song using a variety of Waves plugins. Now, in this final video, I want to teach you something called pre-mastering. Specifically, we're going to use these three plugins to take an already well-mixed song to that next level so it has a little more oomph, excitement, it's a little bit more 3D, and loud enough to compete with the commercial tracks that we're comparing them to. Now, these are three more plugins that I've put on my mix bus, and if you saw the original mix bus video, you notice I've already been mixing through some of those. These three were added at the end of the mix, so they're used a little bit differently. And I'm going to start with the Greg Wells Mix-Centric plugin. This is one of the most amazing plugins I've ever used. It's as close to a magic box as I've found when it comes to plugins, and it's doing three things under the hood. It's doing a little bit of EQ, a little bit of compression, and a little bit of saturation, but it couldn't be simpler to use. In this case, I've dialed up a little bit of the intensity knob. It makes the mix a little bit louder, so I've dialed the output down, so I'm not making the mix louder. I want to hear the effect of the song. Listen to what this does to the mix in terms of bringing the mix more forward and having a little bit more enhancement.
We can't let no one put us down. Let no one bring us down. We value more than that. We gotta stay strong, strong. Invincible. We are incredible. There's no way that we will fall. We gotta.
Wow, used subtly, and you can crank this thing, but even used subtly at around 9 o'clock on the knob, it's making the lead vocal pop through more, the kick drums coming through a little bit more, the mix seems to clean up even more. That's the best way I can describe it. It cleans up some of the low-mid stuff in a very musical way. So that's enhancing my mix already. It's sounding a little bit closer to the tracks that I'm referencing. Now, I followed that with the S1 Imager, and what this does is it creates some stereo width. It's all an illusion, but what you're going to notice is the sides of the mix come to life a little bit more. I've just done a little bit of the width here, and you can play with some settings. You can go real extreme, and it can sound a little weird, but just a subtle bit of this can really create a sense of space and width in your mix that it's hard to get without. Take a listen.
We can't let no one put us down. Let no one bring us down. We value more than that. We gotta stay strong, strong. Invincible. We are incredible. There's no way that we will fall. We gotta stay strong, stay strong.
Again, just a nice touch. It takes your mix and just pushes it out beyond the edges just a little bit more. Now, finally, the big problem with mixing is you find that when you bounce your mix out, it sounds quiet. You play it in an iTunes playlist, you bring it to your car, and all of a sudden you're having to crank the volume on it just to hear the mix, and you're saying, what is wrong with my mix? And nothing is wrong with your mix. Your mix just hasn't been mastered. Every mixer is mixing at a comfortable conservative volume in the studio, and they're not worried about final volume, nor should you be while you're mixing. You should be worried about the sound of the individual tracks and balancing them together, because in your studio, you can turn up your audio interface or your speakers or monitors or headphones to a comfortable level so you can hear it just fine. But what we need to do is, how do we take this song and make sure that it sounds a nice competitive volume that still sounds musical and not squashed out in the real world, no matter where people are listening to it, and no matter how loud they have their speakers. And that's where a simple limiter like the L1 Ultra Maximizer comes into play. This is a great little plugin, and there's only really two knobs that I want to call your attention to. One is the out ceiling, and the other is the threshold. Now, what a limiter is going to do, it's basically a compressor, but there's two things that are unique about it. One is it has an actual ceiling. They call this a brick wall sometimes. This is a ceiling that says no audio shall pass beyond this output, which is great. And what I like to do is dial this down a little bit from 0, at least to minus 0.5, because when you process out a mix, it might still peak over this as it processes and smooths out the digital stepping. So set the ceiling a little bit lower than 0, sometimes all the way down to minus 1. Don't worry, it's not going to make your mix quiet. And then you're going to simply pull the threshold down to tell the limiter, tell the L1 when to start compressing audio. Because if it's all the way up at 0, it's not going to do any compression. As you pull it down, it'll start to grab maybe the kick drum transients or the snare drum transients. Those are usually the loudest peaks in your song. And in the background, what L1 is going to do is turn up the whole mix to compensate, which means you're going to turn down the peaky stuff a little bit, and then it's going to bring up everything else that's just quiet. The bass, the guitars, the vocals. It's going to fill in that volume for you, and none of that stuff will be squashed. So take a listen to what happens. Just so you know, this mix is going to get louder, so the video is going to get louder in a minute. So just fair warning.
But we can't let no one put us down. Let no one bring us down. We value more than that. We gotta stay strong, strong. Invincible. We are incredible. There's no way that we
There's the volume. And if you noticed, what I was looking at is the attenuation meter. This is how much compression is actually happening. And what I like to do is dial the threshold down far enough so I start to see attenuation happening only on the kick and snare hits. And I only want between 1 and 3 or 4 dB of gain reduction, so it's not squashing them too much. And then I'll settle at whatever that final volume is. So take a listen to the attenuation here on the chorus, which is usually the loudest part of the song. And that's where you want to be really testing this, is on the loudest part of the song.
invincible. We are incredible. There's no way that.
There we go. So let's do two things. First, take a listen with this off, the limiter off. Take a listen to what we did with just the Greg Wells plugin and the S1 Imager in terms of making the mix have a little bit more life. I'm going to take those two away, and you can hear kind of how the mix falls apart a little bit.
Invincible. We are incredible. There's no way that we will fall. We gotta stay strong, stay strong. Invincible. We are incredible.
Wider, more exciting, but still musical. And of course, the final one gives it the volume.
Invincible. We are incredible. There's no way that we will fall. We gotta stay strong, stay strong.
And there you have it, how to do what I call pre-mastering, really the final mastering process on one song at a time if you're not going to master this alongside other songs in a record. Get that enhancement, get that clarity, get that width, and of course the volume that you need. So when you render this out of your DAW, it will sound great on just about any system out there. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being a part of this series. Again, I'm Graham at therecordingrevolution.com. Stop by and say hi anytime.